First thing we're going to look at is just simply turning it on. The on button is down here at the bottom left. Once you've done that, you are ready to go. And there's some key features you need to understand about this calculator other than you have your basic numbers, operations over here. You can find the caret key here. This one's important. This is how you do powers. So if I wanted to do 2 to the power of 3, I would type it in that way. Depending on the operating system that you're using, when you do an exponent, it may actually show up as an exponent, in which case if you need to type stuff after that, you need to arrow out from the exponent. The operating system I have up here does not do that, which means I would have to be careful about parentheses if I had more to do after this. Let's see, we also have parentheses down here, as I mentioned. Those are going to be important. This is the button for simply squaring. You will notice above the buttons there are many things. In case of my calculator, in blue and green, but depending on your calculator it's going to be different colors. But there's a second button and it's in blue, so it's going to take me to anything that's up here in blue. And there's an alpha button, which on mine is green, which will take me to anything that's green, which most of which would be the letters that are in here. Unless you're a programmer, you won't really need to use those letters, other than maybe goofing around to say hi to a friend. But beyond that, they're going to serve no real purpose for you unless you're a programmer. And if you're not a programmer, I'm not going to take the time to teach you how to do it. But the second key you're going to end up using a lot. So if I wanted to do a square root, I would hit second, and then over here is my square root. So I'd hit the x squared button. Notice it brings me a parenthesis. So I could type in a number then. It's good to close the parenthesis. That way you are telling the calculator it's done square rooting, so if I wanted to do something after that, it would know where to stop square rooting and where the continuation of the operation is going to be. So I could continue working with these. If you have the newer operating system, when you do the square root or any root, the radical sign here will just continue going until you arrow out from under it. So be mindful of what you're doing. Make sure that you're telling the calculator to do exactly what you want it to. Another really important feature here is as your batteries start to get a little bit low, your screen might start to look a little dim and it gets harder to read your numbers, but you don't have your new batteries yet. The brightness feature is here on the up-down arrow keys. So if I hit second and hold the up arrow, my screen gets darker. If I hit second and hold the down arrow, it gets lighter. And if I stop pressing it, then I have to keep going until it gets to where I want it. If you look carefully, you'll see a little number up in the upper right hand corner up here every time I do that. And so I can get the screen to a setting that I'm comfortable with as far as being able to view it. The next button I'm going to show you, this will be the last one I'll show you in this video, is the math button. The math button is pretty important. So when I press the math button, one thing that you'll see is that it comes up as math, numbers, complex, and probability. Depending on what you're working on, you're going to need things that are down here. For example, if I'm doing third power or third root, here they are under the math button. If I need to do roots higher than 3, here it is right here. Notice that by the 7 there's a little down arrow key. So if I push the down arrow key, I can scroll down to all the things that are in there. If I go to the up arrow key, it takes me to the bottom. I'm not going to explain all of these down here. You'll need them as you get into higher math classes, but the ones you'll use in here the most are these top 5. This one and this one, 1 and 2, this says convert to fraction, convert to decimal. I'll show you how those work. I'm going to hit second, quit, and that'll take me back to the main screen. I'm going to clear here for a second, and if I type in 2/3. And when you're doing fractions on this calculator, you do have to enter them in as division. You may want to use parentheses around it if you're doing it as part of a larger calculation. But for right now, I have my 2/3. So when I type it in, I get this rounded decimal approximation. Yes, it goes many decimal places, but it still ended up being rounded at the end. So if I go under math and I tell it to convert to fraction, there it is. It'll take it back to a fraction for me. And that'll come in handy with certain calculations we do, because the fraction is more precise than an approximated decimal. And as I continue working with it, I'm going to want to stay as precise as I can. So knowing the fraction equivalent is going to be beneficial. So again, it's under the math button. The very first thing you see is convert to fraction. Now, if I wanted to continue, if I had a fraction and I wanted to convert it to decimal, it would do that. It comes up as a decimal on its own, so you very rarely would have to use that particular button. However, it is there. Convert to fraction, far more likely to need to use that. Again, under the math button, you have numbers. This is places where you will find things like absolute value, rounding, integer function, minimum and maximum. These are things that, depending on what we're working on, may come in handy, especially once we start looking at lists. Complex, here in Algebra 2 especially, you're not going to have any real use for what's under this. But over here in probability, we will be using the NPR, NCR, factorial button. You may see me use random integer from time to time. So there's some functions over here we'll be using as well. And again, it's all under that math button, one of the most important buttons we have on here other than our standard ones. And that's it. That's what I'm going to show you in this video. Those are some of your calculator basics. Oh, wait, I lied. There's one other thing I wanted to show you. If I'm in the process of doing a calculation, and I just have my 1 plus 5 here, notice that I have 6, and when I hit plus, minus, times, divided by, whatever it is I want to hit, it will come up as ANS. That just means take the previous answer. But if I want to do something with the previous answer, but I can't put it in right away, I want to square root the previous answer. Well, now that I've hit my square root, if I want to bring the previous answer in, rather than having to type it, right now it's 12. It wouldn't be that hard to type 12, but sometimes it's a more complicated number. But above the negative sign here is ANS. It's in blue, so that means if I hit second answer, close that parenthesis, I've now done the square root of 12. And I know it was 12 because it was the previous answer. Also, I'll show you a little trick here. Above the enter button it says entry. If I want to do something and go back to something I've done just before, I can hit second entry. It brings it back up. I can go in and adjust something in it. So maybe I want to do the square root of 49 now instead. But then I didn't have to type square root again. Again, this is a small calculation. It wouldn't have hurt me to retype it. But if I'm doing a larger calculation, maybe it's the quadratic formula, and I want to do it once with the plus the square root of blah, 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 and once with minus the square root of blah, blah, blah. Instead of having to retype the whole thing, I can hit second entry and just go back up in it and change that one little thing I want to change. Nice little trick if you're paying attention. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this particular video, and hopefully you enjoyed Calculator Basics.